To the summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 19th of July of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. The Russians have carried out one of the most resultive attacks since the beginning of the special military operation. The Russians were using dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones to attack the city of Kyiv and the city of Odesa. The Ukrainians yesterday attacked one of the biggest warehouses on the territory of Russia, and this is the video that we have already discussed during the previous update. The Russians struck back, and as a result of the Russian strike, up to 5 warehouses through the entire territory Ukraine were destroyed, including a warehouse on the territory, including warehouses on the territory of the city of Kyiv, Zaporozhye, and Kharkiv. So let's discuss everything in details, and first let's talk about the consequences of attack. Once again, let's take a look at the video that was published by pro-Russian sources this morning, and here we have the overnight Kyiv, lots of explosions, lots of attacks, lots of missiles, and so on. The Russians were attacking the city of Kyiv during the entire night, and as a result of attack, as we discussed just a minute ago, lots of warehouses and objects of military infrastructure were completely wiped out by Russians, and they are very, very big. So let's discuss in details. First of all, let's talk about a warehouse that is located in the southwestern parts of the city of Kyiv. This territory was attacked by Russians. First, we received an article with recorded fire anomaly in this area, and as you can see, a fire anomaly is a very big one. Then we start receiving pictures where we can see the consequences of attack, and this evening we start receiving first videos where we can see what left from this warehouse. As you can see, this warehouse was reduced to ruins without any chances to repair it and to restore it. And this is the overnight video of a fire that broke out right after the Russians attacked the territory. As you can see, this warehouse was destroyed and completely. Moving further, the western parts of the Kyiv agglomeration, just a fire anomaly recorded through the territory, and outer parts enterprise was destroyed by Russians. Another fire anomaly was recorded through the southwestern parts of the city of Kyiv. No videos, just a fire anomaly. We have lots of trucks in this area. Furthermore, we have lots of explosions and lots of attacks through the city of Kyiv itself. For example, this is the morning Kyiv. As you can see, the city is waking up this morning of the 19th of July of 2026, and we can see a very big black smoke over the settlement. Here we have the consequences of attack in the area of the railway of the metro station Lukyanovska. As you can see, the station Lukyanovska was also significantly damaged by Russians during the overnight attack. So we have finished with the city of Kyiv. We are talking about videos and pictures. Of course, there were probably more objects and more facilities were attacked by Russians, but let's move further and let's talk about the city of Zaporozhye, because the city of Zaporozhye was also attacked by Russians badly. In these videos and in these pictures, we can see a warehouse in the northern parts of the city of Zaporozhye that was attacked by Russians with drones, and as you can see, as a result of this attack, this warehouse was also wiped out by Russians. So once again, the Ukrainians yesterday destroyed probably one of the biggest warehouses on the territory of Russia, but the Russians, in response as retaliation, destroyed up to 5 warehouses and ammo depots through the entire territory. Ukraine. The question is whether it worth it or not. Another warehouse was destroyed through the eastern parts of the city of Zaporozhye. Here we have another video published by pro-Ukrainian sources. We see fire crews trying to extinguish the fire through these territories. You can see there are several buildings, of course, and lots of trucks and a parking site with lots of trucks. And of course, the city of Kharkiv. As for this territory, the Russians destroyed a warehouse along the MO3 road. Several months ago, the Russians attacked this territory, but it seems that during the previous attack, the Russians just damaged this Nova Poshta logistic terminal, and today the Russians attacked this facility once again, and as you can see, as a result of the second attack, this warehouse and this logistic hub was completely destroyed by Russians. So once again, the attack between the 18th and the 19th of July of 2026 was one of the most resultive attacks. The Russians didn't attack military facilities. The Russians didn't attack probably military enterprises. The Russians were attacking warehouses and ammo depots. Another important thing that when the Russians finished attacking the city of Kyiv, they continued attacking the city of Odesa. And during the day, we received reports that the Russian Tu-22 M3 strategic bombers were observed heading to Englissu Air Base for equipment with cruise missiles at approximately 4 p.m. Tu-22 M3 aircraft were spotted near the Black Sea, after which the Russian armed forces launched Ha-32 cruise missiles. The Russians, as you can see, according to these pictures, were attacking the city of Odessa and the Odessa port infrastructure. And during the day, we received lots of reports that there were explosions recorded, that the Russians probably even were using Banderol missiles, that more vessels and tankers were attacked by Russians. It seems that the Russians decided to stop import and export through the city of Odessa and through the Odessa infrastructure for the Ukrainian side. As we discussed just several videos ago, most likely in coming 2 or 3 months we won't see any activities. We're talking about commercial activities, neither from the Russian nor from the Ukrainian side, due to the situation that both the Russians and the Ukrainians would attack everything that enters the territory of the Black Sea. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, lots of very important changes and updates were recorded. The Russians, according to information we have, continue their offensive operation or their counter-offensive operation through the western Zaporozhye direction. First, several months ago, somewhere in February or March or April of 2026, the Ukrainians launched a counter-offensive operation in this area. And this is the map of as of the end of the 28th of February of 2026. As you can see, all these territories were under strong control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. But later, the Ukrainians began a counter-offensive operation, and as a result of the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, the Russians lost lots of territories. So this is already the map by the end of the 19th of July of 2026, and this is the map, let's say, by the beginning of the 1st of July of 2026. So as you can see, the Russians began a counter-offensive operation, but as for the Russians counter-attack mainly to the east of the settlement of Stepnogorsk. We're talking about fields and territories to the north of the villages of Maly Sherbaki, and Nestyryanka. So these are the changes on the ground between the 1st of July and the 19th of July. So as you can see, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Now the Russians attacking the northern and the northeastern direction using broad frontline attack, not just through the single pipeline or through a single road. The Russians use the entire front line for offensive operation, and the Russians are approaching both the Orekhov agglomeration from the west, and the Russians are approaching this dense network of the fortifications from the south. So which means that the Russians began their counter-offensive operation, which means that the Russians are tasked most likely during the next several months to restore control over the lost territories during the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation and the city of Orekhov itself. As for the city of Orekhov, the Russians began counter-offensive not just through the western part but also through the southern parts. We have reports that the Russians improved their position significantly in the area of the villages of Novodanilovka and Malotokmachka. The Russians are maintaining the line, tightening the news around the city of Orekhov from many directions. Furthermore, today the group of forces east, after a very long operational pause, reported that the village of Vilna was captured by Russians, and these are the changes on the ground. Today, pro-Russian sources published a video of how the clashes were taking place through the village of Volna, and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation later confirmed this information. And as of now, the Russians are tasked, seems to me, to recapture the territories along the river of Gaichul, and we have lots of villages in this area. There are villages like Bratskaya, Pishchana, Ostapovskaya, Andriivka. These villages were recaptured by the Ukrainians during the March counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side that started somewhere at the beginning of March of 2026. And now the Russians, according to the current configuration, are trying to encircle Ukrainians in this area and to force them to fall back. Now the Russians are trying to maintain the lines through the north and Zaporozhye direction to force the Ukrainians to fall back from these territories further in the western direction towards the villages of Samilevka and Mini Shevchenkovska and so on. This will allow the Russians to maintain the lines and to prepare themselves before the beginning of a major offensive operation further in the northern direction towards the settlement of Pokrovska. Without these villages along the river of Gaichul, the Russians have no possibilities to attack further in the northern direction, but it's a very important village for Russians. The Russians are trying to create a buffer zone on the northern side of the river of Volcha with the purpose to secure the further offensive operation of Russians in the western direction towards the city of Zaporozhye and towards this territory between the city of Zaporozhye and the river of Gaichul. So the major battle for Zaporozhye, for the Zaporozhye direction, is brewing. As of now, very difficult to say whether the Russians are able to get the city of Zaporozhye before 2027 comes, but most likely the Russians would try to shorten the distances to the city of Zaporozhye from the south, east, and the east as much as possible to the level of artillery strikes. Now let's move further. The Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation in the area of Mokre Yali, but the Russians, after first shock, regrouped themselves and began their own counter-offensive operation. And now it seems that the Ukrainians that first managed to break through defenses and to take under complete control the villages of Podubno, Tovsta, Novokhvatska were encircled by Russians, because the Russians, as a result of the Russian counter-offensive operation, managed to recapture the settlement of Andreevka Klivtsova, and it seems that currently the situation looks like this. This is a very important foothold both for Russians and for the Ukrainians, because this foothold is located right between two rivers, the river of Volcha and the river of Mokre Yali. As you can see, the Ukrainians are trying to take under complete control these territories between the rivers, and if the Ukrainians are able to do this, they would be able to secure the city of Novopavlovka for a very long period of time. So this is the task of the armed forces of Ukraine, to recapture positions between rivers and to dig in deeper, and the Russians most likely managed to rat the Ukraine's plans, and now the Russians are trying not to allow the Ukrainians to finish the battle for this foothold by significant number of counterattacks. Now let's move further and let's talk about the city of Dobropolye. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, during the previous days, they managed to improve their positions significantly through this area. The Russians, according to the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, reported that the village of Mirna was captured by Russians. Furthermore, the commander-in-chief of Russians reported that the battles for the villages of Shevchenka and Svitla are about to be finished. So it seems that the Russians managed to answer these villages to the south of the settlement of Dobropolye, and most likely in coming days, most likely the map would be adjusted like this. So we will color this pocket, we will color the this mine. This is the Rodinskaya mine. We will color these three lines because it seems that the Russians managed to finish the battle for this territory, and the Russians continue advancing further in the northwestern direction along these villages, trying to outflank the settlement of Dobropolye from the southwest and to attack the city from behind through this industrial zone in the most southwestern parts of the city. Now let's move further. As for the Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes were recorded through the settlement of Verolubovka. We're talking about this village to the west and northwest of the city of Chasov. So these are the changes on the ground. According to different sources, we added additional infiltration zones through this area. Furthermore, the Ukrainians continue reporting that there are still positions between the villages of Stenki, Podolsk, and Chervona. There are very heavy clashes, but we see that the Ukrainians hold their lines. The Russians are trying to maintain the lines and to shorten the distances, because without taking under complete control this pocket, the Russians probably have no chances to continue advancing further in the northwestern direction, because through this pocket, the Ukrainians still have possibilities to counterattack Russian positions in the area of the city of Konstantinovka, in the area of the city of Chasov, between the cities of Chasov and Konstantinovka, ruining and damaging the Russian logistics. So that that is why now the Russians are trying to finish the battle for this pocket. As you can see, there are lots of strongholds in this area, lots of trenches and fortifications, which also could be very useful for Russians before moving further in the direction of the cities Alexeyevka, Drushkovka, and Drushkovka. As for the northern direction, the Russians once again reported that the battle for the city of Liman is approaching its end. Most likely in coming days we will receive additional report about the situation in this area, but as of now we don't color anything because we don't have enough of proofs to make additional adjustments. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians reported that they managed to create a very powerful and strong foothold on the Ukraine side of the river Voskol, and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, as well as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, reported that the Russians began advancing in the area of the river Voskol in the western direction. Furthermore, the Russians began bombing and basically reducing to ruins the villages of Grushevka and Starovirovka. In this video we can see explosions and attacks carried out by Russians with aviation. Lots of facilities and buildings were badly damaged. The Russians began attacks in this area, which means that the Russians most likely began the major offensive operation along N26 road in the direction of the village by the name of Shevchenkova. The village of Shevchenko was evacuated several weeks ago. Most likely the Ukrainians managed to concentrate additional troops in this area with the purpose not to allow the Russians to break through the south eastern Kharkiv front line, and this is most likely exactly what the Russians are trying to achieve. As for the northern Kharkiv direction, this day the situation here accelerates. As we can see, the Russians improved their positions through the settlement of Kazachia Lopань, and these are the changes on the ground. The Russians improved their positions through the northern parts, which means that the battle for the city of Kazachia Lopань entered its decisive phase. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions along the border in the area of the villages of Goptovka, Vysoka Yaroga, Alexeyevka. So the Russians began advancing further in this area towards the city of Kharkiv from the northwest as well and from the north. So the situation around the city of Kharkiv continued deteriorating, and if the situation continues developing the same way, most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to announce the major or mandatory evacuation of the city of Kharkiv, and this evacuation could be announced within the next 6 or 8 months. As for the Sumy direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians also improved their positions significantly. We have changes through the northern Sumy direction, and these are the changes on the ground. We have a video where the Ukrainians were attacking Russians in the area of the settlement by the name of Krapivshina. Furthermore, according to different sources, the Russians also improved their positions along the perimeter of the village itself. The biggest changes on the ground were recorded through the eastern Sumy direction, and these are the changes on the ground. The Russians managed to take on the complete control of the territory between two rivers, and the Russians approached the settlement of Velika Rybitsa. Most likely, if this information is correct, in coming days the Ukrainians will try to counterattack with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to win some time, additional time, but then the Russians will continue offensive operation. They may try to cross the river of Rybitsa and to enter the settlement of Velika Rybitsa with the purpose to establish a strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Rybitsa, and from these positions the Russians would begin their major offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Sumy from the east, without any chances, without any barriers, without any chances from the Ukrainian side to slow down the Russians, because if Russians enter this big Sumy forest, they will accelerate their offensive operation, and as we discussed during the previous videos, the city of Sumy is a primary target for Russians for 2026-2027's military campaigns. Furthermore, the Russians continue advancing along MO2 roads. The battle for the settlement of Ulanovo enters its decisive phase. The Russians managed to cut the settlement of Ulanovo in pincers from the west and from the east, and the Russians continue advancing. In coming several days, most likely the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will announce complete control over the settlement, and from these positions the Russians would continue their offensive operation further in the direction of the village of the settlement of Esmon, right in front of the city of Glukhov. So the Russians continue MO2 offensive operation, and the Russians will continue this offensive operation until they get the city of Konotop, the largest city between the border with Ukraine and Russia and the capital of Ukraine, the city of Kyiv. And that's it for the short video. The Military Summary channel